our outfitter, or our producer, was a very obnoxious Englishman. And I say that now to illustrate what I'm about to tell you. We took an old horse in. The outfitter went up there with horses. We flew in. And we took an old horse in to use for grizzly bait. At that time, you could bait grizzlies with, or you could bait grizzly bears. You cannot now. Well, we picked a spot to do this operation. That's the only way I could get a bear within camera range of this crew, because they go walking through the woods, coughing and snorting and breaking sticks. I very carefully selected a place where the wind direction was pretty constant. It was along a creek, Stevens Creek. And we planted this horse at a place that would work out best. It was on the other side of the Stevens Creek. We dropped a spruce across the creek and trimmed it for a bridge and built a platform in the trees, real heavy platform. They had 3 cameras up on this platform and a sound man. Well, the bait was out for 10 days before a bear found it. They like their meat pretty tender, apparently. But bear finally found it, and their action started. And my instructions from the producer is that he wanted the grizzly standing up when I shot him, standing up on his back feet. And that's quite an order, because I guess he thought that he could tell bears what to do like he tells actors. And I said, well, okay, I'll whistle at them, and maybe they stand up. They sometimes do. They hear a strange noise. Well, a bear came in one afternoon, and I went down there and whistled at him, and he stood up. And I had wanted to drop the bear on the spot, because this is my first experience as ABC, and a bear running off is one thing. I wanted to drop him right in the picture at the same time. So I used a real heavy arrow and shot at his neck, and I missed him. And he ran off. And the producer, Mr. Bendig, looked at his light meter and looked at the sky, and had another thing, he looked at it. And he said, the light is getting poor. Will the bear be back tomorrow? Well, I'm the expert. And I said, yeah, I'll be back tomorrow, just as if I knew he would. And he said, okay, wrap it up. So we put tarps over the cameras, plastic tarps, and it was only a mile to camp, less than a mile. And no respectable grizzly bear is going to show up at 9 o'clock in the morning, but this was an exception. We went in there at 9 o'clock, and the bear's on the bait. And it's quite a situation, because it's frosty and cold, and these tarps are noisy. But the camera crew, we had a ladder going up, they climbed up, and they would make a noise once in a while, and the bear would look up. But he must have been awful hungry, or like this bear, I stood for the second shot for me. Excuse me. He stayed put. And finally, after what seemed like an hour, probably was 10 minutes, they gave me the okay signal to go across the log and shoot the bear. Well, the sound man had a microphone taped to a tree about 10 feet from the bait, a directional microphone to pick up the sound of breaking of bones and growls and tearing of flesh. And he had a wire running up along the creek and across the bridge and up to the platform. And he said to me, he handed me a coil of wire. He said, would you mind plugging this in? There's a disconnect in the middle of the bridge as you cross the bridge. Well, I had to cross the bridge on hands and knees to keep the bear from seeing me. And I said, yes, I'd take it. So with the bow in one hand, the cable in my mouth, I crawled across the bridge, and I couldn't find any disconnect. And this is, the tension is high, you know. The camera's ready, and the bear's down there. And I crawled back and forth in that thing trying to locate this disconnect. And finally, I found it at the other end of the log, all tangled up in some bushes. The bear had been on the log during the night and playing with this cable. And I had to untangle it and crawl back in the log and plug it in. And I went in and shot the bear. And I didn't shoot for his neck this time. I shot him. I went through both shoulders and cut the aorta off at the heart. And he spun around, growling and roaring, and died just about 50 feet from where I shot him, but unfortunately in the bushes out of camera range. Well, that was the story on that. But there's one, and I guess the reason I'm telling this whole thing, there's always a lot of humor in a thing like that, and we had fun. This cabin that we stayed in, well, we stayed in tents, but they had a cabin there that turned out to be the dining room and cookhouse. New cabin, beautiful job, built out of great big spruce logs. And there was one scene there that Mr. Bendig wanted. We had horses there, and the setting was this. The horses were tied to the side of the cabin, and my guide, Bill Love, just a principal fellow, a young guy, about 30 years old, maybe 35. He had trouble remembering his lines because, you see, you have to get the voice on the film, you have a transmitter in your hip pocket, operated by batteries. You have a little aerial going down inside your pant leg, and a microphone under your shirt. And anything you say goes on the tape that the sound man has. He picks up these signals. He can pick them up to 200 yards, and they go on his tape. And his tape machine is synchronized with the cameras. So that's the way you get that. And we had certain things we were required to say at certain times. And Bill would get a little camera shy, and he'd flub his lines sometimes. So we kept his lines just as short as it could be. And this scene was Bill was saddling the horses. And I was to come out of the cabin with a thermos jug in one hand and a knapsack in the other. And I was to say to Bill, how do you like your coffee? And Bill all he had to say was, I'll have mine black. And then I say, oh, okay, that's what I thought. And I stick it in the knapsack, and we call the horses and ride off. We shot this 7 times. We had 3 cameras out there on tripod. Something always went wrong. We had a fellow in there's a cook stove there, and had the coals there, and I had a fellow in there with a handful of balsam boughs, so we get a lot of smoke coming out the smokestack. And he would watch out the window, and then they would give him the signal, he'd shove her in there, and the smoke would roll out. And then the sill of the door, the sill on the cabin, of course, is the bottom log. You don't cut that because the cabin falls apart. So, and this bottom log was about the size of the one that we're looking at here. And I didn't close the door once, and he yelled, cut. And once you close the door behind you, I don't know what difference that made, but something always went wrong. And finally, at one time, something went wrong, and you'd yell, cut, and then we start all over again. But one time, I closed the door, and stepping over this log, I sort of closed the door on my foot, and it put me in a kind of an awkward position. And I didn't want the film used, but he didn't say cut. So I said to Bill, would you like some moose droppings in your coffee? Bill says, I'll have mine black.
You just hold it for a second.
Yeah, as long as we're on the ABC thing, I made 4 films for them. This one I'm about to tell about involves the hunting of mule deer out in the Jicarilla Indian Reservation in New Mexico. They told us when the ABC booked the hunt, they told them that we were the first white people ever to hunt on this reservation. And I thought, boy, that'll be really something. There'll be deer standing all over. All we got to do is pick out the biggest one and shoot it. What they didn't tell us is that the Indians are shooting them night and day, and that the deer are wild. And actually what we found is if you drive a car by and there's a deer on a hill a mile away, he takes off. And we worked real hard on this thing without much luck. You know, it's tough enough to shoot a deer with a bow and arrow, but to get a camera crew there to get a picture of it is very difficult. So at one time they let out all the Indians out of jail and they put on a drive for us. But that didn't work out too good because not all of them came through on the end of the drive. We tried everything, but finally we were very, very lucky. Matter of fact, I'd given up. I told the producer, you better wrap it up and write this off because this is a real tough one. It'd be tough to get a picture of shooting deer with a rifle out here. But he was a persistent fellow, and fortunately so, because 2 days after that, we got a mule deer coming right at us, a nice big rack of horns coming right at us, and we got a beautiful picture. One of the camera crew was a pretty husky guy and a little bit woods wise, and he followed me around with a hand camera, just a Eastman hand camera, and got the key footage that we needed to finish the film. The other ABC thing was more interesting. It was a polar bear hunt up in the Arctic. I'd been on 2 different polar bear hunts before that, trying to get a polar bear with the bow and arrow. My name is Bear, and I didn't want to go to the grave without having shot all the bears on this continent, kind of an ego thing, I guess, but I had been on 2 other hunts, and twice the bears had charged me after I had an arrow in them, and the Eskimo had to gun them down, so I don't have a bow and arrow trophy. And I told ABC I'm going on that hunt, and it turned out to be kind of a wild one because they much more time was required and entirely different technique. I wanted to shoot a bear without the use of an airplane. I planned on camping out on the ice, and our means of locomotion were snowmobiles. This was in 1966. And we did. Our base was 40 miles away on land. We were 40 miles out in the ice pack. We took thermos tents. They have a pop tent, which looks like an igloo, and a prairie schooner tent. And to get a little bit of warmth, we needed, or felt that we needed, 2 thicknesses of canvas. So we put one tent inside of another one. And that is better than 1 thickness of canvas, and that's about all I can say for it. We had some catalytic heaters to keep our sleeping tents warm, and we had an oil-burned burning cook stove for our cook tent. And the cook tent was 7 by 12, where we had to do all the cooking and all the eating. And you set your tents up on snow, not on ice, on snow. And we had ours set up in about a foot of snow. We had a couple of pieces of plywood that we'd sawed in half and taken out there for a floor where all the traffic was, just inside of the tent. And the back half of this, the last 6 feet, was the recreational room and the dining room, and we had that covered with moose hides. It had the hair up. And that is where the poker games occurred at night also, and it sort of served as a blotter, because when we broke camp, we got quite a little change out of it. Anyhow, we got out there to the outfitters, who, as I said, had a house on the shore not too far from a radar station. That's the dew line that goes across through there, where we're watching for Russians to be coming at us from across the other side of the North Pole. And our transportation back and forth for the heavy stuff was snowmobiles pulling a long sled. Sled was about 12 feet long, pull a half a ton. The going was pretty good because the ice was not too rough between shore and our camp. Beyond our camp, it was a jumble. We went out the first day and set up 2 tents. And we went out the next day to set up some more tents. And a bear had been in and practically wrecked the 2 tents that we had set up the day before. The next day, we saw a bear go by just about a quarter of a mile away. A real nice bear, but there was no use going after him because the camera crew hadn't arrived yet. Well, the camera crew finally came in. They came in on a Norseman with skis, and the ice was smooth enough there by camp where you could sit down. And here again, we had a bunch of city boys dumping them right up in the cold Arctic, and that was really something. They took it for 10 days, and then they decided that they wanted to get out of there. Well, in those 10 days, we had all the film that we needed. We just needed the key picture of shooting the bear with an arrow. Well, Bob Munger was with me this time also. And these fellows got all caught up with this, and they said they wanted to get out of there. So we radioed for a plane from Point Barrow, excuse me, which was 180 miles away. But the plane couldn't get in for a couple of days on account of the weather. And when it did get in, those New York crew, they crawled in that so fast, I thought they were going to come right out the other side. We got them off the ice, and they're finished. They went back home, but they left all their camera equipment, about $50,000 worth of camera equipment, sitting on the ice there beside our so-called airstrip. And the plane was to come back the next day for it, but he never got back for about a week on account of bad weather. And when he did get back, we had to shovel it out of the snow, and there's a couple of pieces of equipment that never did reach New York. Oh, one of the things that happened, there are many idle days in a polar bear hunting camp, because there are days when you can't leave camp. If you did, you couldn't find your way back. They are whiteouts, they call whiteouts, and they're a problem with flying. You don't know, you can't tell how far anything is. For instance, if you're walking in it, it's almost like walking in a fog. You can step off of a cake of ice that's 2 feet high, or run into a cake of ice that's 2 feet high, and you can't see it. I know we came in on another hunt. We came into an emergency landing field in Umiat, which is south of Barrow. That was one of the other trips. And the landing strip was marked in the snow with oil drums, 2 lines of rusty oil drums. And it looked to us like here were oil drums just floating in the air. That's the impression you got. It just looked like they were floating up in the air just the same as we were. But you could get a feel for where the ground was by gauging yourself with the oil drums. Well, on one of these days that we couldn't go out, somebody decided we'd spud a hole through the ice and see what we could catch in the way of fish. Well, we had a nice spud, but we had 7 feet of ice to go through, and we had to tape an extension handle when we got down 4 or 5 feet to the spud. And finally, when we broke through, the hole became about that big around when we were at the top, and it got smaller. And finally, when they broke through, the spud went down to the bottom of the ocean, and we had us a spring. We didn't know that, but the ice was exerting pressure on the water, and we had us a spring. And the thing flooded us out of camp. We built quickly snow dams and whatnot, but we couldn't contain it, and had to move the entire camp. The camera crew left, and there were only 3 of us: Bob Munger and Jim Helmick, who was the outfitter's son, and he had a little Piper airplane there on skis. And we didn't use that, but we used the snow machine. We shot seals with a rifle, and used them. We skinned the seals because we wanted the skins, and the carcasses we would drag with the snow machine to various points of the compass from our camp, out about 10 miles. And on some trips, one of us would sit on the sled and cut pieces of blubber off. The blubber in the seal is a couple inches thick, and drop it along the trail. And then with the remains of the carcass, we would tie down with an ice anchor out in front of the tent. And we thought, well, gee whiz, all we got to do is, just when the bear comes along, we can shoot him right here in camp. Why should we chase off all over the Arctic? Well, it didn't work out that way. Twice bears hit the trail, but both times they went the wrong way. And we also had a blubber pot. We also had a blubber pot working, a 5-gallon Blazo can over a catalytic heater sitting on an oil drum. And that burned round the clock. One filling would keep it going for 24 hours. And you could smell it yourself half-mile downwind, and I'm sure a bear could have smelled it a couple or 3 miles. No bears came in, and actually, as it turned out, the bears, while they had been in an area when we set up camp, they had left. And the reason they left was during a time before we got there and ending about the time we set up camp, the polar bears were hunting baby seals. The seals have a hole up through the ice that they use just for breathing. But when spring approaches, and we were there in April, May, when spring approaches, they open these holes up so they can get out. And the holes are always, these holes that they use for the purpose I'm about to tell, are made where there's snow drifted up beside a pile of ice or something. And the holes come up under this snow, and the mother enlarges an area. She's got a little room there with the hole right in the middle of it. And that's where her seals are born. But seals cannot swim when they're born, strange as it may seem. And they're not taught to swim until they're about a week old. And it's during that time that the bears go sniffing around, and they can smell them, and they dig through the snow and get the baby seal, because it cannot swim away. The mother goes down the hole and she's gone, but to get the babies. We found two places where they had dug out, and where there was blood, where they had killed a seal and eaten it. And just in the interest of the habits of polar bear, I think they're a wonderful animal. They can live out on that polar ice pack where nothing else could possibly live. And they can live because they're terrific hunters. They have to catch seal that are lying outside their hole, sunning, along towards spring, and I guess maybe through the summer also. Seals come out of their hole and to sun, to get some warm sun, I guess, and they lie right beside it, and they doze for about 1 minute, and then their head comes up, and they scan the whole horizon, then heads down, and they sleep for another 60 seconds, and they do that all the time. And if you're hunting seal, we had a kid's sled, and I'd made a piece of plywood, got some shelf brackets, and fastened a piece of plywood in front of it, and cut a hole to look through when you're lying on the sled on your belly, and covered it with white sheet. And you could locate a polar bear with the snow sled, and you could get within 700 or 800 yards. That's about as close as you dared get. And then you got on this snow sled and clawing your way along with your fingers and your toes. When his head was down, you'd work your way up to him. And if you had to shoot him in the head, because any other place they'd be down the hole, which meant you had to have a good rifle, and you with a nice scope on it. You have to know where it's shooting, and you have to get within 150 yards. Would be about as far away as we ever tried to shoot. But we got these seals, and we baited them, and we had the blubber pots burning. And finally, on the 26th day, we had told each other all the stories we knew several times. Matter of fact, we were getting to hate each other. And Bud Helmrichs, the outfitter, came out. He had a Cessna on skis, and I don't know, somebody said, let's get in the airplane and find a bear. So we got in the airplane, Bob and I, and we were airborne. We saw a bear in half an hour, about 30 miles from there. It was along a pressure ridge. Pressure ridges are caused by the wind and the tide blowing a big hunk of ice away from the main body and taking it out. Then you get a change of wind or tide or both, and back it comes. And it's only traveling just very, very slow, but when it meets that shore ice, there's millions of tons moving, and it just piles up a ridge that could be 50 or 60 feet high of ice, and it goes along like a little mountain. And the bears travel these pressure ridges to looking, sniffing around for these seals because that's where they find them. Well, we saw this bear, and he was working his way up this pressure ridge, and we flew ahead, and Bud set us down. We got ambushed behind hunks of ice, waiting for the bear. In about an hour, he came along. We had to fly about 5 miles up, find a place to sit down. He came along, and I got a shot at him at about 50 yards. He turned broadside. He smelled us. The wind was wrong. He turned broadside, and I shot and got a arrow through his lung, and he ran about 200 yards and piled up. And that's the story of the polar bear hunt. And I'll tell you, I was so happy when I got that bear down, in the thought that I didn't have to go up to that cold, miserable place and still try to get a polar bear.
What was your third one, was it?
That was the third hunt, yes. One little story I didn't tell you about the polar bear hunt. We'd taken a bottle of wine with us to be drunk as a toast after the bear was killed, and the directions on the bottle said to serve at room temperature, but we had to thaw it out before we could pour it. Now I'll tell you another little story that involved a hunt with Bob Munger. We had returned from Point Barrow from one of these unsuccessful polar bear hunts, and we're going on a brown bear hunt, a spring brown bear hunt with Ed Bilderback, and we were to meet him on Kodiak Island. He was bringing his boat up from Cordova, where he lived. Well, the polar bear hunt was over quicker than we had expected, and we went down to Anchorage for a few days. I met a field and wildlife man there who we asked him if the black bears were out of hibernation yet. And he said, yeah, he'd been seeing a few of them on the southern side of the mountains, and that he was going out turning an arm the next day, and if we wanted him to, he'd take us out there in the morning, pick us up in the evening. So we went out there. I wasn't interested in the black bear. I was a cameraman, and Bob was a black bear man. And we climbed this mountain. It wasn't too high, and it had a flat top, or fairly flat. It was a tundra country where you sank in, pretty deep at each step, and it was open except for buckbrush and some small hillocks that had trees on them, spruce trees and bushes. And we saw a moose in one of these thickets, and I wanted to get some pictures of a moose, so we did a pretty good stalking job and got up to about 40 yards of it. It was a cow moose, and I shot some pictures. I had all the pictures I wanted, and normally when I sneak into a situation like that, I take just as much pride in sneaking back out with the thought that they have never known I've been there, but for some reason or other, Bob let out a yell. Well, it was the spring of the year, and this moose had a young calf, and we didn't know that until he let out a yell, and when she saw us, she came after us. And we took off across the tundra, shedding cameras and archery equipment as we went. My legs are a little longer than Bob's, and I quickly got the lead. And we were making for a little hillock. It had just one tree on it.